Today, as usual, we have a couple of presentations, and as you might have seen in the notices for the meeting, we have and we're going to have Carson Tavner, who is the founder and the executive director of the Thai Initiative, is going to present first on subnational citizen diplomacy leadership. Definition, history, the importance and challenges and opportunities in subnational citizen diplomacy leadership. Carson will speak for 15 minutes, up to 15 minutes, and he'll be followed by Lori Mulvey, who is the director and the co-founder of the World in Conversation Center for Public Diplomacy at Penn State University. And she will be presenting about the center itself and its activities. Following their presentations, each 15 minutes, we'll have about 40 minutes of discussion. I strongly encourage you, this is after all citizen diplomacy, to post your questions and your comments while they're presenting to the Zoom chat, and we will get to your comments and your questions when we get to the discussion. Let me see here, and then we'll finish off with announcements, including a look at the Citizen Diplomacy Bulletin, the most recent edition or the current edition of the Citizen Diplomacy Bulletin, and an announcement that the CDRG is going to be called the Citizen Diplomacy Dialogues next year, and is going to be moving to a new organization, but will essentially remain active. New details to come at the end. So without further ado, I am going to have Carson start his presentation. Carson, it's all yours.
Thank you, Paul. I was assuming that we were projecting from your end. Shall I instead set it up to project?
Yeah, if you can, yeah, you can present from your end. That would be better.
Just a few more clicks then.
And Janice, you have I think you're going to be taking attendance and maybe asking folks some questions.
Yes, I'll be taking attendance of the meeting. If your name is not on our list, I'll be asking for your basic information, last name, city, but I'm pretty sure that everybody's providing that information on the chat. So
right.
That'll be helpful. But pay attention to the chat in case I send a message.
Great. Thanks, Janice. Janice is one of our interns. And again, for those of you who just joined us, please introduce yourself in the Zoom chat with your name, your city, your country, and other information just about you. Carson, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Paul. Hello, everybody. This is very exciting for me. I have been practicing citizen diplomacy since I was in my high school years, 1986, Puyallup, Washington, getting introduced to the concept that we should build community, that we should become leaders in our communities. And one of the key questions that was asked of me at that time was, do I understand and do I have a vision for an international community? This was the early 80s, and China was opening up, and I had no interest personally in China at that time. But I now look back and I realize what a great thing it was that I was led to see that we ought to start a sister school between my school and a school in China. Looking back in history, I realize now that this was happening at the time when Washington State was creating a relationship with Sichuan province. And this has a lot to do with why then, through the career that I spent in the Air Force, I experienced, I participated in, and just basically watched from a distance the growth of a state level relationship and a regional level relationship that had vision and hope, at the same time that I myself was participating in a national relationship representing the United States Air Force and all of the interests of the United States of America in wondering about this relationship between itself and the People's Republic of China. Just a very quick intro on this very first slide to explain perhaps why I've included in my name, the fact that I'm a retired major, where that comes from and how that figures into this, it will not be the focus of the presentation. And I'm also very excited about changing the title slightly to Talking Subnational, because seeing that Lori is coming from a co-presenter, coming from a center titled and engaged in conversation dialogue is so important. I thought it would be a great theme to share today, because what I'm going to do today is give you a tool in this season of giving. Why are we not getting, there we go, we're just going to go forward that way. What I want to give you today is a tool. Everyone ought to walk away from my presentation today feeling like at least there is something new in your mind that you've realized, hey, maybe I could start practicing using this tool with whatever it's with regards to students or partners or whoever it is that you engage with. And that is thinking about this 4 levels of relationship, which came to me as a way of understanding the structuring of our new global world because of the experience that I was having with Washington State while also working at the national level. So here we are. It's 2012. This picture is in Chengdu, China. That's me in the center. And I am leading a delegation from Washington State to go to the province of Sichuan as the president of the Washington State Sichuan Province Friendship Association. And not to dwell on this story or on this picture at great length, but I use this picture numerous times as an example of what I'm talking about when I want to introduce the head scratcher of what it means to be subnationally identified. It doesn't shock anybody to know that there would be people of Asian or Chinese descent going with me from Washington State to go on a delegation to China. But what might surprise a lot of people is that in this picture, there's only one person who is a US passport holder. Everybody who was with me from the Washington State representative side of this friendship association was themselves at the national level PRC. They were PRC passport holders who had come to the United States, living in Washington State, residents of the Seattle area, passionate about the relationship that is so hopeful and so full of consequence. But when we got together and we went and met in Chengdu with the Sichuan province officials, they're sitting on the Washington State side and the whole conversation is in Chinese. And I know that for the Sichuan province officials, they were rather struck and sat back a bit at recognizing that here they are speaking with people who they would have considered themselves, and yet it's the other side of the table representing the state of Washington. We were not officially speaking for the government, but the Washington State Sichuan Province Friendship Association is an organization recognized by and supported by the governor's office in Olympia. All right, moving on from this slide, then I just want to step into helping you to understand what is in my mind with this tool that I want to give to you of 4 levels of relationship that I think help us in the 21st century to get our minds around, get our hands around some of these complex, difficult issues that face us globally. And the 4 levels are, as you've already seen and read, civilizational, national, subnational, and individual. And today I'm focusing on helping you understand and think about subnational as the level which is the most consequential opportunity holding level, that of the 4 we really know the least about. It is only in the past decade that the word subnational has even been in anyone's lexicon. And it's perhaps possible that today is the first day that you've ever heard this word. So we're going to jump into understanding it by stepping through each of the 4 levels here one by one. And I'm going to start not at the top, but with national, because we all understand what it means to have a national relationship. And I have by the way, this structure is now one that I'm teaching as a global tool, but you will understand from my context and background that I am explaining it with the skin of the relationship between America and China. So please understand that I'm not trying to teach anything specifically just to America, China today. I want you to take it within your own regional context. I hope that it will be very helpful. I expect that it will. Nevertheless, you will see multiple examples here today in which I'm learning the lessons out of the America-China relationship. So at the national level, we have the United States of America and we have the People's Republic of China. And the reason I have these flags come in the way they did and the way that they are overlapped in a very, very tiny way is to reflect the reality of distinction. The national level is a level that emphasizes distinction. There is very little. There are a few examples of things that are both USA and PRC. A joint memorandum of agreement would be a simple example of something that exists in this world today that can be stamped with the identity and the ownership of both the United States of America and the PRC. But for the most part, the national level of any nation state is working hard to make sure that there is a distinction of identity, that there's a sense of who we are and not trying to become the same as another nation. So just without going further on about national levels, because we see this in lots of things, we understand that it's distinct. At the individual level, we have a complete reversal of that identity in which the individual level relationship is by its very nature indistinct. We've often gotten ourselves into major trouble as humanity when we have at times in our history tried to draw a line dividing between who are these people and who are these people. In those times and places in the world where we have tried to draw a distinct line and say, this is you, this is us, that has led to a lot of trouble. The reality is that human identity is very indistinct, particularly in this age of global migration, in the age of genetic change. We find ourselves more and more knowledgeable about, interested in, and engaging in a blending of our genetic identity. Nevertheless, there is still something called being American, and there is something called being Chinese, as would be applicable to just about any part of the world today. But they blend, and the point of this, so I don't linger on this slide too long, is to say that the individual level of relationship is an indistinct characteristic, whereas the national level is very distinct. And this is one of the reasons why subnational is very important, because it's a bridging function of being able to say there are important elements of distinction that are similar to what happens at the national level, but we are more associated with and we're more closely in touch with what's going on locally at an individual personal level that lends us to the characteristics of indistinction. So I don't have anything to visually demonstrate this about subnational, except for you to understand that it is a bridging level between the two. So now going back up to the civilizational level, let's talk about how words are important. We've already described down here at the individual level that we say, okay, well, what does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be Chinese? The answer to those questions is often, maybe entirely, wrapped up in understanding at the civilizational level what it would mean to say the American civilization and the Chinese civilization. And this may be the first time that some of you have even thought of or heard of the American civilization as being even a thing to be referenced. We don't think of America as a civilization. We think of it as a nation state, because that's what it is, the United States of America. But I turn your thoughts to recalling that there was a period of time, short-lived, only 3 to 4 years, in which another nation state, the Confederate States of America, was hoping to be distinct from the United States of America. And the Confederates did not achieve their strategic objectives. But if there had been a successful strategic achievement, the CSA would never have called themselves not American. And this is actually an extremely close parallel to what is going on today with the Strait of Taiwan, where we have a civilization, China. And what does it mean to be Chinese? And yet, 2 states, at least, we have to debate and talk about what that means for the Republic of China on Taiwan. And again, not to get rabbit trailed into all of that, I want to emphasize that there is an importance to saying that America and China at the civilization represents the civilizational level of thinking, whereas the USA and the PRC is the national level of thinking. And I would say that for those in America who have studied Chinese history and PRC history and relationships for a long time, it's relatively easy in our minds to imagine a way of thinking about China that is not PRC. But it is much harder, but possible, for people to think, what is America that's not USA? Ooh, that's a lot more challenging. But again, it's possible for us to understand that this is a way of thinking. I'm not talking about trying to define organizations in the world. So at the subnational level, we have all kinds of identities, which is now what I'm going to step towards defining subnational. Let's start with this word international. It's really easy to understand that this is rooted off of the word and the concept of the nation state, that which occurs between nations. So when we talk about subnational entities being states and provinces, cities, businesses, schools, nonprofits, that's all going to be wrapped up in the next slide. I challenge us to consider that 100 years ago, you would be hard pressed to be able to go to a university and get a degree in international relations. In the 1920s, if you were interested in China, if you were interested in Asia, you would not have gotten a degree in international studies. You would have gotten at best a degree in what was called Oriental Studies. Right? And we have changed a lot in the 20th century in regards to our academic approach to studying the globe and studying nation states, et cetera. So right now, you cannot go to any college or university in the world and get a degree in inter-subnational relations. But I hope that perhaps even as part of this talk today, it's part of that long process and dialogue of us generating the capacity that someday, maybe there will be young people who walk across the stage with a degree in inter-subnational relations studies. And I believe that the CDRG is exactly the kind of group that can inspire that kind of possibility as researchers. So what are the modes of subnational power? Getting a little bit into the definition, what are we talking about? There's all kinds of ways in which subnational power is manifested. We've already listed previously on the slide states, cities, businesses, universities. Here, I want to unpack a little bit more the idea of communities and to emphasize that of all of these modes, I think the very first place to start, if you really want to get into understanding and researching and comprehending what does it really practically mean in the 21st century to talk about subnational power, you've got to look at cities. Global cities are a thing. Many of you, I suppose, are already in the process of studying, researching, thinking about, reading about, and participating in the work of global cities and how that work is different than the work of the nations in which those cities find themselves residing. When it comes to communities, I think of civil society first and foremost. And in America, civil society is a major growing sector of our economy. Whereas if we look at the People's Republic of China, civil society hardly even exists. It's absolutely infantile. And I hope that we, as a civil society globally, because I know there's civil society in all kinds of regions all over the globe, that we might find ourselves capable and inspired to share of our experience and our hopes for civil society with the People's Republic.
Carson,
Now,
you've got about just a minute.
Wow, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, if you can.
Okay,
I'll give you a couple more minutes, but if you can.
No, we'll wrap up. So here's the going through. At least we've gotten through the major points. So when it comes to words carrying meaning, sometimes we say international, and I think we should be saying global, because we're so stuck on the idea of the nation state being that which governs the world that we forget that not everything now is international, that is global. Particularly in the IT aspect, here we are, CDRG. We are a global organization, but we're not coming at this because of the countries in which we reside. We're coming at this because of the topics, citizen diplomacy, which is near and dear to our hearts. We're a global, not an international group, I would argue. All right, now international is based off of national, global is not based off of subnational, but I believe that in order to really get your minds on understanding when we should say global, it helps to understand the transcendence and the importance of subnational. National state power is on the decline. Subnational power is on the increase. With more time, we would go through these bullets. I think it would be funny to bring in Elon Musk as an example of someone who we can look to as a great subnational power example on the rise. Doesn't matter if you like him or not like him, but the fact is he's an example of this increase in subnational power globally for vision. So a lot of people at the individual level are taking action in the 20th century. We love this phrase, think global, act local. I want to encourage us to think about a fourfold call to action, which I don't have time to now go through in detail. I believe these slides will be made available afterwards. I encourage you to come back and read through these up, down, right, and left ways to action so that anybody can take participating action in the global environment at a level that is perhaps a little bit more graduated from simply think global, act local. How do you act? Well, these are some of the things that you can do. Right. This tool and other tools are captured in this new textbook that I've been working on with Kendall Hunt. It won't be available until next year, but thank you very much for listening. And that is it. Thank you, Paul, for this opportunity.
Great, Carson. And by all means, let us know when your textbook is published, because we'd be happy to, and in fact, you should post to our LinkedIn and Facebook groups the good news when that happens. So we are going to switch to Lori Mulvey, who is going to be talking about the World in Conversation Center.
Hello, everyone. Good morning to those of you in the East Coast, on the East Coast of the US, and probably good evening to some of you who I've seen in India and other places to our east, or to my east anyway. Okay, I am going to share my screen so we can start this. Hang on one second. All right, so everyone can see my screen, I'm guessing. Okay, so basically I'm going to talk to you about why I think the work that we do is what we've been calling public diplomacy, although we are talking about just shifting the subtitle of our center to citizen diplomacy because it just seems more understandable to more people. So I'm just going to start with a quick phrase from our website, and I'm actually going to read it. I won't read anything else, but just as this is I think it captures everything that I'm about to talk about. So very simply, we envision a world where small group facilitators use dialogue as a tool to enable citizens on both sides of a border, whatever that border is. This feels similar to kind of what Carson was just talking about, all the different ways we think of borders, to solve their problems together. In our view, this is instrumental in supporting cross-border peace and security of all kinds. And so I'm going to talk about how I think specifically group facilitators do this. And I'm going to start with the parable of my life, which I didn't know would be a parable of my life till I was in my 50s, but so it is, and you all know it. But before I click to the image, the single image that reflects it, I just want to say this parable. Actually, let me just show you. It's the blind scholars and the elephant, which most of us probably know. I believe it comes from the Indian subcontinent, its roots anyway. But anyway, this is an indicator to me of an ancient problem, right? This is something we all know. And I think brilliantly, this parable, from whence it comes, shows us this problem that we have about all being positioned in somewhat as blind scholars in a particular spot, and therefore only seeing what we can see. And then other people also being in a spot and seeing what they can see. And yet we get really clear about what we see and call it truth eventually, and actually don't acknowledge, value, accept other truths. Right now we have this whole conversation in the US about alternative facts, kind of snarkily, if that's a word, but in fact, we all actually do have alternative facts. And I say this in broad brushstrokes. There's all kinds of exceptions to how to talk about that. There is misinformation, all of that. But at the core, I think what this parable tells us is that we really do have to value what other people see that we don't. And our center, under my leadership, we've built a dialogue method around this parable, because what it also shows us is the solution, which is that we need to talk to each other and actually put the pieces together of the different things that we see from the different positions that we have. We all have positional knowledge. And instead of battling what other people see, we actually need to put the pieces together that are true. And in fact, what I've seen over my lifetime of this work, which is spending way too much time in groups in conflict, is that facts are always in dispute in a conflict. That's actually the core of it. So when we say if we could just agree on the facts, I think that we know that actually that is the core issue. And when we get to those facts that we don't agree on, I think we're actually somewhere. But what's missing from this parable is a dialogue facilitator, a small group facilitator, I would say, because I think most of the work that we need to do is about groups and a little less about the actual dialogue itself. So really, we need somebody that's going to get these blind scholars to talk to each other. And actually, we know that there are legacies of violence and oppression and all kinds of things that, for all kinds of reasons, make it impossible for these groups of people to actually value each other. So we need people who have some level of training to get them together and begin this process of defining the thing in the middle of the room. This isn't the elephant in the room idea. This is just, what is true? What is this thing between us that is a problem that we actually all need to come together to define? So that is our work. Groups need facilitators, and World in Conversation, for lots of reasons that are beyond my choices, has been training facilitators. Even before we started 20 years ago as the Race Relations Project, but I've been doing this work at Penn State with student facilitators since the mid-90s. So it's a very long legacy of training people to become facilitators. So I'm just going to say a little bit about what our facilitators are doing. And there's obviously a ton to say about what this method does, but I will just make a little note on the side to say that because we came from what has been a project called Race Relations Project, and really talking about race on this campus exclusively for 15 years, the inequities and inequalities of people coming together, which is really, I think, true in any intractable conflict, are central to the method that we're working with, because we can't pretend that people are at the same levels, have the same experiences, will go back to similar worlds. They won't. So the blind scholars and the elephant parable really shows us and centers that people are in different positions, which we call sociological address, and that actually has to be the center of the conversation. More to talk about. But here, we have a book called, which I'll show you the link later, but it's online and it's free, and it's basically a facilitator training manual if you couldn't take our training course. So and it's being translated into 13 languages. It's in 4 or 5 right now for the purpose of this public diplomacy effort. Anyway, sort of the basic idea of the facilitator, one of the basic ideas is that they're actually trying to bring groups of people from combat and conformity, i.e. going along with the group or battling differences. So going along with each other or battling each other's differences, and bring those people through the tools of conversation to a place that has more balance so that we can actually start to work together. And my sense is that working together in groups to solve problems is really the intention of our work and the best use of the work. In the middle of the balance is conflict and collaboration. They're always connected. Conflict is not a dirty word. Conflict is not a problem. We are always different than everybody else who is not us. And so conflict and collaboration need to always be our goal. Facilitators are always trying to push people to a place where we can still recognize that we're in different positions and see different things and value different things, but build bridges across those differences to each other so that we can design the world together, that we can solve problems with our opponents. That's the core work, I think, of this public diplomacy in the hands of the people. The intention ultimately is to build something new from our differences, right? I don't think we build the world with our friends. I think we build it with our enemies. And to the extent, enemies, I use that word in quote, and to the extent that we turn away from our opponents or our enemies, I would say to that extent, we actually aren't building our world. And so we truly need facilitators to hold the tension of our differences and allow a creative third way to emerge. I'm using language from all kinds of realms, but I think you get the point. So that's the basic work, is us training young people. And at this point, it's always been university students, very diverse group. Internationally, our work is now let's see, how many, we have, I think, 5 different locations that we have partnerships with students from universities at those other sites in 5 different places in Iraq, Afghanistan, the Netherlands, Colombia, Korea, Yemen, and the list goes on, where those students are training with our students and doing the work, all for the purpose of learning how to hold other people in the tension of their differences in order for them to think together and create together the world. I'm going to pause in terms of like the ideas there and just tell you a little bit more about World in Conversation. I said a little bit of this earlier, but the World in Conversation started as Race Relations Project in 2002. But with those lovely humans that you see on the left of the screen, or those are the actual students at that time, just a few that I said, hey, do you want to try this project with me, where we just start dialogues on campus? This happened after a student uprising where the president of Black Caucus had received death threats on campus, and the students, a very multicultural group, rose up and resisted how Penn State was responding to this, et cetera. And so we grew out of that. That's some of the faces of those same people. This past year, we had a gathering. So it's always fun to see people still involved, which I think is actually important to share, is that this work of facilitator training is really transformational education. It's totally practice oriented. Students are learning by doing the work. And it's been very impactful for alumni over time, which we've been learning. So World in Conversation itself, as I'm about to say, and what I'm pointing to, operates like a clinic. Students are in dialogue almost before they've even entered a class. Basically, after 2 weeks, they're leading dialogues because we are so committed to this practice model. And so similarly, we study the method by all the observation and coaching and direct engagement in the dialogues with students. And then, of course, serve the Penn State and international community by making facilitators available and training training individuals in other places for them to develop their own work. Quickly, this is a little bit of a strange slide. This is last year. This is just showing an image of our campus and where all of our facilitators come from, because they come from all colleges. So not just a liberal arts or a communications college, engineering, computer science, et cetera. So last year we had 184 facilitators that we trained, 2,135 dialogues, a few other numbers. In 2022, 25 dialogues a day on average, including Sundays. I said already 184 facilitators, 2,100 plus dialogues, and 19,000 plus participants went through our dialogues in an academic year. So that's just a little bit of the scope. This will be hard for you to see the detail, but this is about 15 years of data over time. So this is, for example, the first one. During this dialogue, there's an atmosphere that allowed our group to express any perspective, a very important piece. And as you can see, between 88 and 96% over time, participants are saying, I agree or strongly agree with that statement. We believe we're starting conversations that make a difference. Did we? 70 to 95% over time are saying agree, strongly agree. So it's interesting. Nobody wants to come to our program. Everyone that comes is required to come because we partner with courses around campus in all colleges, because we decided we don't want to preach to the choir, if you will. We don't think we're preaching, but we really want people involved in these dialogues about contentious issues that don't want to be involved because they just don't think they have anything to contribute. But anyway, they come not really wanting to come, but they leave for the most part telling us that the experience was constructive. So just finishing up really quickly, this is just the big broad brushstroke. We're seeking to advance the capacity of humans to solve problems with their opponents, and thinking that this tool of dialogue facilitation, again, I really should say small group facilitation, because I think the emphasis is too much on the way we communicate as opposed to how groups function, which is really what I see a facilitator is working with how a group is functioning. Communication is just one part. This is the book I was referring to. If you go to worldinconversation.org/book, you will find this online resource, which is really, this is showing that the translators and our project manager last year. So you're seeing Korean, English, oh my goodness, I'm leaving my, yes, Spanish and Polish. Farsi is being added, I think, this week, and one other one recently. But anyway, point being, this was a collaboration with a young woman in Serbia who drew the story in the images that you'll see, and it helps the international. Sorry, not international. It helps people from multiple language bases to be able to understand the text, because the images are really just so helpful. And then just have to end with just one of our small classes of facilitators in training during a pandemic world, which gave us the opportunity to embed further all of our global partners into our work, because everybody's online. Not Penn State students are the ones receiving the training and a few people can listen in. Now everybody's receiving the training in a similar way. So I think I can pause here, and yeah, I'm happy to find this group of people that I didn't know existed, and looking forward to conversation. I will
Great,
unshare
Lori.
my screen.
Thank you. If for those of you who have your cameras off, if you're willing and able to open your cameras for the discussion portion of our meeting, it would be much appreciated to engage everybody. So we have about 40 minutes, and this is your time essentially to ask questions, make comments, et cetera, and so forth. So this is citizen diplomacy that involves participation, so it would be great to get your questions. Feel free to if you want to think about how you're going to articulate this, to write it first in the Zoom chat. Some of you have already done so. I've asked some questions. I tend to ask, FYI, fairly hardball questions. But that's just me. I'm kind of concerned about how effective we are as citizen diplomats, and whether or not our hard work is quickly destroyed. But we can get to those questions at some point. I'd like to start though with some of the questions that are in the Zoom chat that have been posed by other people. And I think we started with a really good one from Zoo, who I can't remember what your precise name is, and I don't know if you want to kind of articulate the question yourself, but this is the one about in authoritarian countries where voices are silent and institutions all have to show allegiance. Do you want to ask your question? You, I think, are muted. If you want to turn on your audio. Okay, maybe having trouble with.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
My first question was regarding authoritarian states, where I feel that civil society groups, they have been silenced in some way or the other. So how do you think in this case they can act as a bridge in the near future? Is it possible they can act as a bridge in the near future between citizens and the government?
And can you repeat, remind us where you're coming from, what city and country, and in all your cases, if you could do this, because some of you are coming not from the United States, and that would be great to know where you're coming from. And so we have some sort of context for your question.
Yes, you mean I give my introduction a little bit?
Just briefly, your city and your country and your name.
Yes, my name is Vineet Malik, and I'm from India, Gurugram, National Capital Region.
Gotcha.
So,
Lori,
yeah, when you ask your question, I wasn't sure at the end what you were saying. Were you talking about the relationship between citizens and their governments, or given the government structure, citizens and people from other nations? Now I'm like trying to adjust my language, but can you just?
May I?
See, yeah, that's my question. But again, civil society. It was regarding civil society, the first question, right? Is there any hope of civil society acting as a bridge between governments and citizens? That was in the chat box.
And Aman, Banvi, I think you wanted to interject before Lori or Carson answer.
Yes. The reason I was interjecting was my question is related to what Vineet has just asked. So we can club both the two, and then Laurie and Carson can delve on that. So Laurie and Carson, to put it in perspective, we are speaking about the context as it stands today in India. And there are two sides to this question that what Vineet had in mind was that of late, the political structure is turning right. And there's a lot of conflict which is going on in the civil society. So there's a lot of what I believe in it. You were referring to an obvious hunt down or toning down of the civil rights groups which are there, who are trying to do their job in reaching out to other communities and bring them together, and which are not allowed to do so. Am I correct?
In the first question, yes, it's about in China. I'm giving an example about China as well.
Okay.
In the first question, and the second question is about the differences, right?
Yes.
In spite of differences, how can diverse groups
May I
collaborate?
just jump in somewhere, and then I think it might help just to say, like, this is what I'm seeing from my blind scholar position. I'm actually explicitly, when I think of this work of public diplomacy, and I don't say this naively, I am thinking of citizens working in spite of the way government of their government. Now, this is different in every different place, which is why, for me, giving this tool, and Carson's talking about a tool as well, but giving this tool, teaching people in Afghanistan, Iraq, it's whatever places have come to us and said, we want to do this too. They are to find ways to use this in their context, but I'm not the work is to empower the people, right? And obviously our governments disempower us in many ways, every way. I think in the United States, we're meaningfully experiencing a lot of this in ways that maybe weren't so obvious in the past. But nonetheless, my work is pushing this tool to the people. And I recognize that many people in the United States, in the West, whatever it is, don't want this. They have other tools. And many people in other places do want it and don't want it, right? I find that there's people, I call them bridge people, in every place who actually are built in such a way, is what I've understood, that they are the people that can build bridges. And I can talk about what is the purpose of that. But anyway, I do want to say that I really see this as one of the ways the people take power into their own hands to solve their own problems in their own communities. Because what I observe in the United States is that the game of government is actually not meant to serve the people. I mean, it is meant to, but it doesn't, I should say. I know I'm saying a lot of things, but yeah, for me, this is a tool for the people to use in spite of their governments.
Carson?
I think that there is a lot of hope for civil society to act as a bridge, but I would prefer not to use the bridge analogy. When we use the bridge analogy, it's a great analogy, but in the context of conflict between sides, when you're building a bridge, the other side can be saying, we don't want a bridge there. And they work deliberately, aggressively, to destroy the bridge building efforts. And that is so frustrating, to be trying to build a bridge and the other side doesn't want the bridge. So that's one reason in which I think in this context, we might want to include something other than a bridge analogy in bridging between governments and citizens. But I would simply say that I think there is hope because of where power resides. We have really been holding on to the centuries-old comprehension that the nation state's power, which is penultimate. I mean, we really do have tremendous power at the nation state level. I'm not saying there isn't much power there, but it is in relative decline. There is an increase in subnational power. So if we say, if we ask, is there any hope for civil society in a future for citizens? I would say we find that hope in creatively manifesting the use of the power which does exist, especially where there is good connection to the internet, to be able to communicate and build and organize. And these are the ways, these are the reasons why so many nation state powers are currently fighting against their citizens, is because there is, whether it's conscious or not, there is a recognition that this relative loss of power is threatening the identity of the nation state, and that people globally around the world are going to say, you know what, I'm more interested in having this kind of life with people that I can live it with peacefully. I'm not necessarily interested in doing that from the perspective of holding a national flag. I'll stop there.
So I want to give actually Aman Bandvi, but also Vineet, Malik, and possibly others who self-define as living in authoritarian regimes, the ability to kind of respond to our speakers and to all of us, really, because obviously there are countries where civil society is under attack, and others where it's not so much under attack. And so it would just be good to get your perspectives, quite frankly, as to this question, I think, which Vineet asked, which is a really important question about kind of how is this citizen diplomacy possible precisely in conditions of authoritarianism, where in some cases the government may be actively trying to shut down efforts at whether it's between citizens and government or across nations. Vineet, do you want to speak first, perhaps? And you have to unmute. There you go. Oh, you still have to unmute.
Okay, now am I clear? Yeah, in this, I actually wanted to discuss about China. China was coming in my mind a lot, about the role of civil society groups, what is their status, and how are citizens managing and surviving amidst coercion from the state, from an authoritarian state.
Is there someone here who happens to be in a position of more authority than I in being able to speak to this issue? Because I can speak to that from a very informed perspective and years of watching exactly that question, but I don't want to presume that I am the best one to answer, because I think we're being asked here about what is actually happening. So just a little pause there. I don't mind being interrupted here. So in the past 2 years to 4 years, the answer is different than it had been for the past 20. That's one thing I think is very important to understand in the context of my answer here. There have been only a few decades, but a substantial number of decades in which experience in civil dialogue, in being active in a community that is neither government nor business, was present among the citizens of the PRC. And so now that we are in a changed environment, in the past 2 to 4 years, there has been incredible living over on that condition. I would compare this to the experience of what happened similarly, but specifically within the context of the Christian church in the former Republic of China, when in 1949, the communists came to power and Mao put a lid on all of this as well. We did not know it at that time, but during those decades of the Red Years, what was happening in the context of the Christian church in China was that everybody thought it was dead, but it turns out that it was very much vibrant and alive. We just didn't know it because of the lack of connectivity. I would only use that as a parallel in my answer here to say that now that we are in a new era, it may be that we will have to wait and discover what were the methods, what are the ways in which civil society, which from 1980 to approximately 2020, or we'll say 2015 actually, there was a growth in civil society in the PRC. Will the participants of civil society reemerge in another 10 to 20 years, who knows how long it will be, to tell us the story, right? So that's one hopeful. I hope that that is a hopeful answer. Now, for right now, we want to know what is happening. What does happen is that there is a rapid manipulation of language to somehow, and this is where I don't have the answer to how they managed to do this, but in the Chinese language itself, there are methods that the PRC citizens are using to rapidly change the language that they're using online in order to express things that the algorithms would have shut down if the algorithms didn't know what to be looking for. And as fast as the algorithms respond to the new language comes out again. This week, the latest form of this communication came out in the form of a blank piece of paper. And if you're not aware of this, the blank piece of white paper says, I have so much to say, but I can't say anything. And that is the issue. We're at the point right now where Chinese people are in the PRC are saying, we don't even feel like we can talk about what the issues are to talk about. The issue to talk about is the fact that we can't talk about any issue. So their method is a language adjusting method. The method is also a constant IT technological solution to seeking out VPNs and ways to make VPNs possible. This is where I would invoke the possibility that in the future, what Elon Musk is trying to do is another example of game changer. What if you can provide internet access to people from space that don't have to wonder whether or not their government is going to allow them to connect to that network? I'm going to stop here because I could see that I could just keep going on and on. I hope this was a bit of an answer to the question.
And that was an interesting one. I think you guys, some of you may be aware of the fact that of what Carson's referring to, that some people, a lot of people in China are raising these blank sheets in order to express the fact that they can't speak. They're not allowed to speak. We have other questions, but I want to kind of open it up and see if there are people who want to respond to this trail of discussion, or this thread of discussion, I should say, around authoritarianism, or if we can, or if we want to go on to other questions, because there are other questions in the chat.
So, taking advantage of a little gap in folks' thoughts. At first, I wanted to thank Carson and Lori. I'm obviously very stimulated by your topics and your presentations. Appreciate them all. So in my experience, this kind of dialogue that's so necessary comes mostly from listening. I mean, this is what's fundamental. And every public diplomatist, every citizen diplomatist will tell you, listen first, stay quiet, reflect, and then maybe talk later, next time even. So when we talk about, sort of seeking out possible shared interests, I'm reminded of, the famous interest-based negotiation theory and practice of Uri and Fisher, used in the Middle East dialogues and peace dialogues and in many other conflict resolution fora. If thoughts come to mind about the methodologies of the two of you, and the fact that the tools that you are both talking about are really, for me, more process oriented than sort of tools like a toolkit and metal and steel and all that kind of thing, because human beings are so dynamic. As a social worker and as a former military official, you all know it takes a lot to get these people organized, particularly in small groups, to have a mind meld, So I should stop now, but anyway. Thoughts, others?
What I just want to quickly respond to in Debbie's comments is a passion in my life about changing our vocabulary from the Industrial Revolution types of words of balance and steel and power and bridge, and incorporating 21st century organic words that are more related to weather and to biology and to life processes. Catalysts are a good, I think catalyst is a good word that we can use when we want to talk about two things that would react together. The catalyst is not part of the reaction, but a catalyst makes that reaction possible or makes it faster, easier. I think it would be fantastic in citizen diplomacy areas, thinking specifically of Lori, talking about facilitators, for facilitators to see themselves as catalysts as opposed to bridges, because a bridge is an industrial revolution, physical kind of term. A catalyst is an organic, life-giving chemical kind of process. So I don't know if that helps, but I think sometimes our language, really brings power to things. So what Debbie just mentioned made me think of that. I just wanted to share that real quick. I think in fact, catalysts are another one of the tools that I talked about.
I actually, I want to say that I think groups are our biggest problem, one of our biggest problems, and one of our biggest resources also. And that is why I am so passionate. And this is not a choice of career for me, by the way. I think it's so important to know that I have been just pushed into, and when I've tried to do other things, I've been brought right back into this work in ways that feel way beyond me. But I say that because I grew up in a family that was very connected, but many people who study families, enmeshed would be the word. And it was something why I say that is because families are a group. And so it's easy to see dysfunctions of families, right? So I've always been focused on the way groups work, but never thinking I ever want to be in a group or work with groups. But for some reason, I studied groups when I did my master's in social works, obviously all kinds of unconscious things. But why I'm saying this is because as much as I've never wanted to be in a group or don't like groups, I have found, I see the profoundness of what is possible in a group when they are operating well. And I don't think it's possible, or it's more of an exception than a rule, that a group works well when it's not facilitated. And so the book that I'm suggesting to you all that's on our website really lays out the idea that we live in a world where we know that when something goes wrong with our bodies, if we're lucky, we can go to a medical professional. And at least we know that it's possible, even if we can't access it, which is a whole other conversation to have, right? About how that's even possible in our world. Nonetheless, we know that there are people that can help us. But when our relationships break down, when groups can't work together, we don't know that there are people who can help. And I think many facilitators are not facilitators. It seems like everyone calls themselves a facilitator. They have an agenda that they want to convince people to think a certain way. And I'm being really specific in saying that what we need in the world are people who can hold a group, hold the tension of a group, and value the people in that group for what they see, right? In order for those groups to work well together on the terms that group can come up with or can address together. And I think that is so practical and so possible because I see it all the time. I've seen it for so many years. And I see it in places where people tell me, oh, people there, they don't talk. This is a Western thing, or they can't talk, or they don't. And I see that this is not true. But anyway, so I really think that too much is put on people to be better than they are. And what they really need are professionals, and all kinds of levels of professional, to hold space in groups for them. I don't think this idea that we're so polarized we can't talk, not true. That means you don't understand how groups operate. Because it's natural for groups to separate into two if they can't comfortably agree. That's without a facilitator. What is dividing people is the very thing that is the potential for the innovation. So anyway, I just want to get to me the practical nature of this and the power that most of us have to actually solve a problem in our community or our neighborhood or our school or our work is, to me, vast.
Lori, in line with that, can you give us an example, or and Carson as well? Because I think we all appreciate your passion and this good point about and the importance of facilitation. Groups can be both problems and solutions, and with proper facilitation, I guess groups can be solutions. Can you give us an example in your work thus far with World in Conversation where there have been kind of beyond what happens in a particular interaction or a particular set of interactions between two groups that say might be on different sides of a conflict that actually leads to enduring change? I guess that's the hard question, my non-softball question about these things, because one of my biggest concerns is we have a lot of what appears to me to be really good feelings that are created by citizen diplomacy in particular settings, but they're oftentimes kind of decontextualized. In other words, they're not anchored in power and in relationships to people in power. And so they therefore kind of just end up being these really nice conversations that don't actually change the situation on the ground in people's everyday lives, but rather seem like nice interruptions from people's lives and normal power relations.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't fully mean this, but what I tell my students is we're not interested in empathy. And we're actually interested in solving problems. Now, are our students solving problems as facilitators? No, they're doing clinics and they're in dialogues. And most of what they're doing is creating some kind of empathy. In other words, getting people to see other people's positions and the knowledge from those positions, or the awareness of what that means. And that's profound. And I've seen for decades, and our facilitators actually are the ones that have the most experience, or the most profoundly activating but long-standing experience of what you're talking about. Those feelings then translate into living differently. That I have seen with facilitators, not with participants, but that's why I'm actually, this is the work that is now evolving at the center. And I'm going to actually try to answer your question, is to train people to actually realize that what they're actually able to do is solve problems together, and not just talk about my identity, your identity. Oh, how I understand now people like you. No. I actually don't have to understand people like you. I have to just value you and value that you see something that I don't see and recognize that, right? So that's the game-changing work. What I just to your, and that's the developmental work that we're doing now, Paul and everyone, that I'm seeking people to do this work with me. But World in Conversation, the reason I showed you those 7 students that started this with me is my husband and I actually, is because this has been a project forever. Since that time, it has been something that has evolved only with the people in it and only with the different ways we've seen things, right? And so we've always recruited people that are not from one culture. And so that gets us into all kinds of things about recruiting and et cetera. But we've demanded that our staff and our student facilitators come from many different backgrounds, experiences, et cetera, right? And together, when we get to a place where we say, we don't like this, or this is a white environment, or why aren't we doing this particular cultural thing, or how come we're doing this instead of that? We just do it. We address those things as they come. We demand actually that people get to what they disagree with, whatever's happening, and build around that. I can only say that I'm passionate about it because I've seen what has happened over these years where I have not, and this is why I say this, my vocation and my ambition has not been to build World in Conversation. It has built itself because people have actually come together from these different perspectives, semester after semester after semester, and built something together. Something where they could each feel that they were invested in it and their culture and their experience was visible too, right? Because we're not building a skyscraper, we're building an environment and a process. So that's my concrete answer to your question.
Okay, Carson, and then others, feel free to chime in. Carson?
This has been so incredible. Lots of thoughts. So I'll just say the word mentoring. I think that one of the most practical ways that we can say, this is how this is going to connect, and it's a long wave motion because human life cannot go farther and faster than it actually goes. But real mentoring and not just simply giving advice to a young person. I think that's a key part in answering this question of how do we connect this to real power? Because what mentoring can do is it can take a young person who we've seen has capacity, has skills, has insight, share with them a vision, have them achieve their own vision in learning how to love people and value people more than valuing what they think. And then that person helping them move into positions of authority. I cannot make someone's career in the State Department. I was never a State Department official, but I know a lot about how to help a young person go from college into the beginnings of a position in a career in government. Not that I'm a shaper, just simply I know how to mentor people. And I think that if we take the young people who are working with us, we help them understand this is what you're capable of doing. The world needs you, that they will do that work if they find themselves working into positions where there's some influence. But on the subnational level, I want to encourage us to recognize that we don't have to aim for high-level government positions in order to have influence. I'll just stop right there. I see that
there is a hand up, and actually for someone who as I understand it, is in the Foreign Service in St. Lucia. But before we get to her, I just want to quickly take a photo of everybody. If you could turn your cameras on, at least briefly, if not, keep your cameras on, that would be great. I just want to make sure to get everybody smiling. And so in three, on three, if you could smile, 1, oh, and everybody's coming on, I think. On 3, 1, 2, 3, smile. Fantastic. So thank you so much. Jocelyn is joining us from St. Lucia and either has a question or a comment.
Good morning. Oh, well, good afternoon here on our side. Can you hear me, Kelly?
Yes.
Okay, I just a question I want to ask and kind of asking, but putting out a statement and to get your feel on it. I don't know how many of you are, well, okay, Steve, I'm Dr. Justin Clark Fletcher, and as you know, from the island of St. Lucia, and I'm interested in what's happening in another OECS country, Dominica. I don't know if any of you know of the present election that's taking place, general elections that's taking place in Dominica right now. So these are two groups. Okay, Julie, they're two groups and they are opposing. And the government has, the present sitting government who called an early election where they were supposed to call the election in 2025. They're calling it now. So they call it a snap election, but the opposition is asking their supporters not to vote, so they're not going to participate in this election because they said that the government had promised before they would, after the last election, that before there would be another election, there would be a referendum. So that hasn't happened, and on that basis, they're not voting. So they're asking observers and all the other stakeholders to come in and put to put some light and shed some light into this, to bring some peace into this whole situation. If you were the person to go in and speak to those two groups, how would you handle that? Hello?
I'm going to quickly answer.
Yes, sorry. Thank you.
And with great humility, as I'm used to not being the one with the answers, but the one with the questions. But with great humility, I will say my first thought, and actually something that I think about a lot, is getting a small group of people from each, building a small group with people from each group that I think that have the capacity to have a conversation and use that as a fact-finding approach to make a decision together about what to do next. And I realize that is contextual and all kinds of things, but I think it's so crucial to get the really distinctly different sides facing one another, and mostly, but in particular, people that have less representative responsibility and more that can actually be a representation of those views, which I can say more about. But I just think that the resource of humans talking to each other is just deeply underused, and I would need the direction of that experience.
I would echo what Lori said, and taking a cue from how Debbie shared with us earlier. We've been focusing here on saying, getting people to sit down face to face to talk, and then understanding that so much of what that talking really is being quiet and listening with, of course, if everybody's silent and everybody's listening, nobody's sharing anything. And that's why facilitation is so important, so that this is your time, you share. And that's exactly what Lori has been teaching people to do. It is very difficult to trust. That we haven't even talked about trust yet in this whole discussion, and it's a fundamental behavior that is difficult for us to do when we believe that there are reasons to not trust because of agendas, because of history, because of beliefs. By beliefs, I mean assumptions that we make inside ourselves about others.
Carson,
so I think that's an
also,
important area to examine. Is
why. Oops, I'm so excited by what you said earlier, Carson, with like this making this distinction with levels, because it's so hard to talk about people and conflict when it's happening at different levels, right? And not just happening, but I could be both a representative of my nation state, but also I'm an individual. And so I think I just wanted, when you said trust, I also wanted to add that people, and I always think about this, Jocelyn, this might be something interesting for us to talk about, but I always think of people who are in official positions as ambassadors. Like, I don't know how much you can change your mind, right? But when we have citizens coming together, in other words, could you represent something? But when citizens come together, even with these really distinctly different views, experiences, et cetera, life chances, opportunities, they can change. They're allowed to change. They can be impacted. And that's actually what we need. So you, of course, have to have trust, but trust cannot be built when you have people who represent, because there will be that you can't change a nation. You can't change a diplomatic policy, so to speak, right? So we just so need people who are changeable, or, who have that ability not to have to represent.
And strong leadership that in their personal vision and passion in their role knows when and how to make an institutional change, to say, all right, I'm not going to be a mouthpiece. I'm going to be an influencer, because that is what my position carries with it. It's just that most of the days you go through day after day, after week, your position is to represent an organization. But every once in a while, that larger leadership needs to not say, I am simply a mouthpiece, and they need to be speaking back to power.
Just a quick interjection here. Brian Smith from the USA has added, I have a term for that problem, provisional representation. Do you want to elaborate on what you mean here, Brian?
Yeah, sure, Paul. Thank you so much. It's just a term I came up with to sort of describe the different layers of our own selves, and how we have a citizenship, but we also have something, and we're also sort of affiliated with institutions and different organizations, and even international organizations or whatever it is. How do you kind of see yourself as representing those different layers of one's own life and your all your affiliations? So whenever you're speaking as a mouthpiece or as a representative of your organization, you sort of say so. And when you're just speaking personally, you hold that sort of right to do that. You're not synonymous with all of your affiliations. And I think that also goes to what Carson was saying about all these different levels and how you fit in. And I think that there's an old sociological term about like nested communities, and how we have all of these different, it's like a nesting doll. You know, you peel off the sort of different layers, different connections that you have to different institutions and organizations. So it's kind of a civil district where when you're called upon to speak, or you volunteer to speak, you kind of make it known who you or what circumstances or conditions.
Thanks, Brian. Jimmy Kolker, and we'll have to finish with you because we have to move on to kind of announcements. So Jimmy Kolker, if you could also indicate remind us what city and country you're from, and what your occupation is.
Greetings to everyone. Thanks for the good discussion. I'm a diplomat in remission living in Washington, D.C. I was in the Foreign Service for 30 years. I got to be U.S. ambassador twice, first to Burkina Faso and then Uganda. And I guess I'm reacting as a practitioner, but I hope that the citizen diplomacy groups and the great ones represented here in the discussion we've had isn't seeing the profession of diplomacy or the people who practice it in some kind of rigid 20th century or even 19th century model. The idea that, you're just there to read from a script and for talking points is not the way we succeed. If we're good at our jobs, and some of us are, it's to expand the areas of collaboration and agreement and reduce the areas of disagreement and conflict. And clearly the civil society at all levels can be a multiplier of that. That's one of the tools that I think a good diplomat would say, let's think about who in the society might agree with us or advance some of our goals, and who might be the ones who how can we overcome some obstacles using various tools that are not just kind of shouting orders at each other, but looking at actual areas of collaboration and engagement. And Debbie's absolutely right that listening is the first part of that. And again, understanding the society in which you're trying to put your priorities on other people's agendas needs to look at those words carefully. Why is this a priority? Who are these other people, and what are their agendas? And understanding all three of those and making that clear, I think is something we have in common, both as sort of professional diplomats and citizen ones. I think it would be a shame, at the end of the last century, all of the second to last century, 19th century, all the liberal professions established a credentialing procedure to be a doctor or a lawyer, even a clergyman, a barber, a hairdresser. You need a certificate. Diplomats have no such credentialing process, but I don't think that means that there aren't skills involved, that there aren't ways of doing business that you learn by experience or by education or by talking to others who are very good at the job, and they aren't the same role. I think what a citizen diplomat can do and what someone representing a government can do are complementary, and I hope we keep that in mind. Thanks.
Can I just want to say something, Jimmy, I love what you just said. I wish we could have way more time just to talk, me and you. But I think you said this one thing is like, we don't read scripts. And paradoxically, we say this all the time in our training, people are reading scripts all the time, not diplomats, that's not what individuals have inherited scripts, read script, learned. And it's so hard to get past it to what is the core of the thing, what that you actually see, not what you've been told, not what you like to believe. So I just want to say, like, yeah, there's so much more to talk about, but thank you for checking that point of like, wait, we're not, in contrast to the good work that people like you are doing. So anyway, I just wanted to me, it was funny when you said that, because I'm hearing it all the time, the scripts, that is.
Yeah, and Jimmy, we're honored to have you as a former ambassador in the conversation. I think you underscored an important point that Lori's making about, and I think that's implicit in a lot of what you guys have been saying, which is the importance of underscoring that citizen diplomacy is in some sense an art, or and in some cases a science that needs to be practiced, and you can get much better at those things. So hence the importance of kind of training in citizen diplomacy, including things like Lori is doing, which is facilitation, group facilitation. So I want to thank our presenters for their stimulating presentations and for a vigorous discussion. We're going to switch briefly because we only have like 5 minutes, but we don't really need all that much time to tell you about what's going on. I posted in the Zoom chat a few things. One of them is that is the first thing I posted are the times for CDRG meetings coming next year. So if you plan to or would like to attend, please mark your calendars. On March 8th, we will be having a discussion around health diplomacy. On June 6th, on city diplomacy, speaking of subnational diplomacy, an area that's thriving. On September 6th, on something dear to my heart, which I'm still thinking about and learning about, democratization. It's actually abbreviated. I'm sorry, I didn't write that out, but it's democratizing and localizing international relations. So how do we go about doing that at a metro regional level? And lastly, on December 5th, we're either going to talk about digital diplomacy or big data authoritarianism and citizen diplomacy. We haven't figured that out yet, but I also want to thank Debbie, our vice chair, who's been active in actually recruiting our speakers for this and other sessions for her good work. So I want to allow our intern Amal, who's joining us from Israel, a little opportunity to share with you the most recent issue of the Citizen Diplomacy bulletin, which we produce with every meeting. Amal, can you share your screen and show it, or do you want me to do that?
Can you do it, please?
Okay, so you go ahead and start, and then I will quickly find it and show it.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So I'm presenting the city bulletin for December 22. The first announcement is about the CDRG is moving from Public Diplomacy Council of America. I'm sorry, the Citizen Diplomacy Research Group will be part of Learning Life and a partner of the Public Diplomacy Council of America. The second announcement is about the World Forum on Democracy and Peace. It will provide a new platform for democracy promotion and peace building. And it will focus on the growing threats for democracy around the world, and also on the ways to support victims of human rights abuses. It will take place in Berlin, on February. And second one, we have a program called Experience Africa, and it is launched by the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy, and it's to promote social and economic development in Africa, and also to strengthen relations between cultural groups and African nations. And after that, many U.S. embassies offer public diplomacy grants. Like, for example, we have two examples here: the U.S. mission to Spain and also the U.S. embassy in the Netherlands. Learning Life, it's a nonprofit developing international family diplomacy. So it invites qualified and motivated people worldwide get training to become a family diplomat. So you can contact Paul for more information about Learning Life. And also for the Citizen Diplomacy Research Group, it offers the members a free and growing bibliography. And on page 3, we have the recent reports, articles, and videos and books which are related to many subjects, to citizen diplomacy, to soft power, to civil society diplomacy, and also to international cultural diplomacy, and international higher education and citizen diplomacy, and the effective forms of environmental diplomacy. And the last pages 4, 5, and 6, there are helpful resources that you may or you would use it for your work or for your personal stuff. They are like the academic journals and research journals. Like, for example, we have the Place Branding and Public Diplomacy, the Journal of Public Diplomacy, the Hague Journal of Public Diplomacy, Diplomatic Courier, Foreign Affairs Online, the Digital Diplomacy Coalition, and on page 5, we have Civicus, the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, Model Diplomacy, Participate, Learning Global Citizenship Framework, and we have the United States Institute of Peace, Global Diplomacy Lab, and also the USC Center for Public Diplomacy. On the last page, we have AFS International Programs, and also the US Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. Also, we have a Carnegie Endowment of International Peace Publications, Center for Citizen Diplomacy at PYXERA Global, World 101, Sister Cities International, and IEARN. So if you have any other information, you can contact Paul for sure. Thank you so much.
And likewise, if you have any announcements, please share them. You're welcome to share them. I'm going to just share with you. I believe, shared the link to this article announcing the details of this. Basically, the Citizen Diplomacy Research Group is going to be called the Citizen Diplomacy Dialogues next year, and we'll move into Learning Life, the organization that I run. The meetings will not change, although we will focus on kind of how do we build the field of citizen diplomacy at times, and how do we build our power as citizen diplomats across the world. We'll be moving from 6 meetings per year to 4 meetings per year. So those are their kind of key changes, and you can read more about this in the link that I post in the chat. Is there anything else that anybody would like to share in terms of news that's citizen diplomacy related or else? This is, I think, a good opportunity for Lori, if you want to post that link to the in the chat to that guide. And by all means, we can share it, or you can share it to their LinkedIn group and the Facebook group, because that will reach larger audiences. I also want to emphasize that whatever you post in the chat is going to be in a set of meeting minutes or notes that will be shared out to over 1,000 people across the world. And I think it's now 180 countries that receive information from the Public Diplomacy Council of America's Citizen Diplomacy Research Group. So any other announcements? Linda.
Yeah. Hi, I'm so bummed I came in late. I had another conflict. I love this group, Paul, and your website looks fantastic. I'm just going to put our video competition for teens across the world that can make a 2-minute video on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and their role in that, and then link with teams all over the world to work on those every week in our hubs. And they are eligible for up to $500. We have 10 winners, up to $500 to implement their dreams. So that's all in that link I just put in. Thanks.
Great. Any other announcements? All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your time and for the rigorous conversation and your presentations, Lori and Carson. We will see you in March. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. Bye, everybody.
To you too. Take care.